Russia's invasion of Ukraine is set to dominate a meeting of G20 foreign ministers. The group of rich and developing nations have begun their talks on the Indonesian island of Bali. The countries involved are ones likely to feel the effects of a food and energy crisis that the war is setting off. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov opened his visit by holding talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. Wang is also expected to meet face-to-face with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. US-China tensions remain high over Taiwan and trade disputes. China has also refused to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, while the US is sending military gear and other assistance to bolster Kyiv's war effort. Amid the tensions, Indonesian President Joko Widodo has been trying to mediate. Last week, he visited both Russia and Ukraine in what he described as a peace mission. Here's more on Indonesia's unique stance on the war in Ukraine.
Joko Widodo has sought to maintain good relations with both Russia and Ukraine. Indonesia is what Vladimir Putin calls a friendly nation for Moscow, unlike any of the Western powers. Widodo has refused to give in to Western pressure to exclude Vladimir Putin from the summit of G20 leaders in November. His visit to Moscow and Kyiv last week reflected a delicate balancing act. What I said in Kyiv, I repeat here. Though the current situation is still hard, we must keep opening more room for dialogue. I have conveyed a message from President Zelensky to President Putin, and I express my readiness to become a communication bridge between the two leaders. The content of that message from Zelensky was not made public. Widodo was the first Asian leader to visit Kyiv since the war began. He invited President Zelensky to attend the G20 Leaders Summit in November, even though Ukraine is not part of the group. Widodo has expressed sympathy with Ukrainians over the war and said the country's territorial integrity must be respected. Prior to the meeting, he toured the Kyiv suburb of Irpin to witness the devastation firsthand. Indonesia is sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine, but has declined to provide weapons for use against Russian forces. Widodo came fresh from an international summit in Germany, where he was able to compare notes with Western leaders and meet with those who have previously sought to persuade Vladimir Putin to end the war. Indonesia has had success in the past in mediating in regional conflicts in Asia, but Widodo says he has no illusions about the complexity of the Russia-Ukraine war. And in a reminder of those complexities, Zelensky hinted he would only attend the G20 summit if Putin is not there. But the Kremlin says Putin has already confirmed his attendance.
Let's go to Jakarta now and speak with Lina Alexandra, head of the International Relations Department at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome to DW News Asia. You were quoted this week in Malaysia's The Star newspaper as saying that Joko Widodo's trip to Ukraine was not a peace effort. So why did he go?
Well, basically, I think we need to clarify first. I think from the press statements that the president made after the meeting with the Ukrainian president and also the Russian president, I think it's quite clear that there are several goals or objectives of him going to visit the Europe. Basically, the first is to reiterate or to emphasize the invitations to both countries to attend the G20 summit in November in Bali. That's the first message. Second is, of course, to express the empathy and also the concern regarding the conflict, the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And also, in that context, he also mentions that he's actually willing to be the messenger of a peace message from the Ukrainian president to the Russian president. And the third point, I think this is very, very clear, that Indonesia, the Indonesian president, expresses the hope that both countries can also can return to the global supply chain where the commodities from both countries can can go back to the global supply chain, so it can actually avoid the crisis, the food crisis, the energy crisis that is actually facing or haunting many states, including in Southeast Asia.
Okay, you've outlined possibly some of the reasons I'm going to ask you on my next question, but if you could sort of go into more detail as to why the war matters to Indonesia and more broadly to Southeast Asia.
Well, I think to some extent we need to recognize that in terms of geographical sense, that the conflict itself is quite remote from the region. But of course, I think it is very clear for everyone that the implications of the war, especially in terms of the disruption of global supply chain, this is something that really implicates the region very much, especially with the supply of Bali and also potassium to make fertilizers, things like that. That really implicates the region that is still suffering from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemics.
Talk to us about why is Indonesia choosing to stay neutral in this conflict?
Well, I think for different reasons. What I can say, I think it is very clear. We recognize ourselves that we don't really have the capacity to be the so-called peace mediator, for example. But we are the country that actually are implicated the most from the impacts of the war itself. As I mentioned earlier, it is, for example, Indonesia is one of the biggest importer of the barley from Ukraine, for example. So this is something that we need to deal with, and that's why I think the president needs to emphasize on this. That's one point. Second point is definitely because Indonesia holds the position as the president of the G20. And there is also an interest to make sure that we can secure the G20 agenda later on in the summit. Because of course, we all know that there has been issue that some countries might not want to appear in the summit later on. So as the president, I think Indonesia needs to make sure about this.
Do you think Indonesia sees this too possibly as an opportunity to improve its international image?
Well, of course, I think that's quite natural, of course. But at this moment, I think the focus is really first to ensure that these countries that are conflicting each other, that they return to the global supply chain in order to mitigate the current food crisis that we are suffering, including in the Southeast Asia region. And of course, the second thing is to make sure that the G20 is successful under Indonesia's chairmanship.
Okay, that was Lina Alexandra, the head of the International Relations Department at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.